You won't believe what just happened. The US has just shut down kitchen nightmares after an absolutely terrifying discovery. Stick around as we dive into the shocking details that led to this dramatic turn of events. This was the episode that got the iconic show cancelled. With every restaurant that Chef Ramsay visited, he unveiled a wide range of problems that led to the restaurant's downfall. From questionable cooking practices to overpriced food to even the poor treatment of their employees and customers, Gordon Ramsay has seen it all. While this man had unparalleled determination to revive these failing businesses, what he had to go through was truly horrific. And after all of that, most of the restaurants either reverted back to their old ways or couldn't sustain themselves with their large debts. Now, you've seen Chef Ramsay yell, scream, berate, and totally lose it while handling some of the most stubborn owners and chefs we've ever seen. The show portrayed Chef Ramsay as a man who was in absolute control of the situation. But in truth, Chef Ramsay began to fear for his life. Yeah, now who expected that? Well, honestly, I don't blame him. The multi-Michelin star chef only agreed to do the show to guide people who were misled in what could be called a highly competitive industry. What had Chef Ramsay not done for the dying restaurants? He almost never turned away despite coming across the worst of the worst kitchens that were literally rotting. Instead, he made sure to get to the root of the problem and fix it. Like this one right here.
Oh my god. No, come on.
Not even the owners or chef could stand the stench of the place, but Chef Ramsay pushed through it like a champ. That's only because he took on this challenging job with nothing but good intentions. But it was sad to see all of his efforts backfire. From ungrateful owners suing him under false pretenses to lazy chefs feeding him highly contaminated and hazardous food, Chef Ramsay was finally done. He was tired of being away from his restaurant and being forced to eat crap food by Michelin star chef wannabes. The last restaurant to be featured on the show was Bella Luna in Easton, Pennsylvania. The production team then had Chef Ramsay revisit the place once again before calling it off for good. But it's not fair to accuse the owner of this Italian restaurant, Rosario Scolo, for putting an end to the show. Because, well, the culprit was someone else. Recounting an incident from a horrible restaurant he visited, Chef Ramsay spoke about a chef who did this.
He served me food where the cat has literally pissed on him.
God, that's no joke. Any idea which restaurant Chef Ramsay was talking about? Make sure to let me know down below because that's just disgusting. However, in the same interview, Chef Ramsay mentioned the name of a restaurant which further urged them to quit the show.
From Bonaparte to Ledec, the journey's been tempestuous.
The famous chef was talking about the infamous episode when he visited a restaurant called Bonaparte's in Silsden, England. So this place was a hot mess from the get-go. The owners, Sue Ray and Tim Gray, were struggling to bring in customers and people refused to visit even when the food was free. That's how bad things were. Chef Ramsay stepped in to work his magic like he would at any other restaurant, but boy was he in for a ride. The service was a disaster with tickets piling up on the fridge and the food being just god-awful. I mean, Tim was a mess in the kitchen, throwing things together with no care in the world. And when the pigeon breast with mushroom ravioli finally came out, they were burnt to a crisp. Could you imagine waiting for more than 30 minutes for your starter only to be served burnt ravioli? That's gross. And it gets worse. Sue was way too busy running the bar upstairs to even notice what was happening in the kitchen. The kitchen was a health hazard with old lentils and furry potatoes in the fridge. And don't even get me started on the scallops. Well, Tim cooked up a scallop dish for Chef Ramsay. But they were so rancid that even the famous chef retched and vomited after tasting them. I mean, that's just brutal. However, the real kicker was when Chef Ramsay got food poisoning. The food was so bad that it actually made him sick. When he inspected the fridge, he found something that looked like a sheep's turd, and I can't think of anything more disgusting.
It looks like sheep's turd that's been infested with ants.
I kid you not when I say this episode was a train wreck. These two chefs almost killed Chef Ramsay. Even though he brought up this episode in the interview, this wasn't an isolated incident. The world-renowned chef has had to eat food that was almost fatal so many times that this is what happened.
What, 11, 12 stomach ulcers? I live with Renee.
There's no doubt that Chef Ramsay's work ethic and dedication is off the charts. But he didn't deserve to be put through such a nightmare for the sake of the show. Remember that one restaurant called Casa Roma in Los Angeles? The walk-in refrigerator was so vile and disgusting that Ramsay found it difficult to even stand near it.
Whoa, no. Jesus Christ almighty.
And that's not all. If the kitchen was this bad, then imagine what the restroom would be like. Chef Ramsay braved himself to face the horrifying truth that lurked in the nastiest bathrooms we've ever seen on the show. And let me tell you, he doesn't take out his trusty black light very often. But when he does, you better believe things are about to get real nasty. The moment he flicked on the light, oh boy. What he saw on those bathroom walls and the ceiling was downright putrid. I'm talking bodily fluids caked onto all the surfaces possible, and this is what it looked like.
Oh my good God. Green and yellow identifies bodily fluids.
Chef Ramsay was absolutely horrified, and well, I'd feel the same way. In an interview speaking on his day-to-day life, Chef Ramsay actually revealed that he wasn't some snobby fancy pants. He seems to like cooking regular food at home. That's mainly because he doesn't want his kids growing up thinking that they're better than everyone else because of their food preferences. And guess what? He's even into fast food. But despite all of his years in the culinary field, if you're a beginner chef, then Chef Ramsay's your guy. He's super nice to people who are just starting out as long as they're motivated and dedicated. Like Scooter from the Cambridge Hotel, for example. However, if you're some kind of poser claiming to be a chef when you clearly don't have the skills, now that's something that gets under Chef Ramsay's skin. Who does this remind you of? All I can think about now is Michael Bardavid from The Secret Garden. That guy thought he was better than Chef Ramsay.
Is everything perfect? Even in your kitchen? I don't think so. It's f***ing clean.
That's just ridiculous, and Ramsay doesn't have time for that kind of nonsense. However, he does make time to revisit the restaurants he helped revive. And he actually went back to Bonaparte's. But this time, he found out that Tim had gotten not one, but 2 written warnings. The famous chef was shocked to see him chilling out on what should have been a busy night for the restaurant. Tim had reverted back to his old ways, and once again, the fridge was full of rotten food. What's more, the mussels were just sitting open in the sink.
There's mold and fur.
What a colossal waste of Ramsay's precious time. Just like Tim, there were several other chefs who refused to accept feedback because this is what happened to the chefs over time.
Got lazy, given up, and lost that hunger to be competitive.
But like I said earlier, contaminated food wasn't the only issue Ramsay had to deal with. The famous chef was also unnecessarily getting caught up in legal nightmares for just doing his job. Take Martin Hyde, for example, who used to be the manager of a popular eatery called Dylan's. Martin's career took a nosedive when the Kitchen Nightmares episode was released. Chef Ramsay pointed out some pretty nasty stuff, including rat droppings on the floor, rotten hamburger meat in the fridge, and much more. After the episode aired, Martin was fired from his job and his reputation was in shambles. So what did he do? Well, he decided to sue Chef Ramsay and Kitchen Nightmares for $500,000, claiming that they ruined his professional reputation. According to Martin, Chef Ramsay called him lazy on camera, and the show's producers blamed him for all the restaurant's issues. Martin even claimed that Chef Ramsay's comments completely assassinated his character. But obviously, the lawsuit was a failure just like Martin. A judge ended up throwing out Martin's case and ordered both sides to enter arbitration. Chef Ramsay denied all of Martin's allegations and even spoke out about it in an interview. He said, "I would never ever dream of setting anything up. I want to sleep at night." Now, this was needless trouble for an extremely tireless job. Chef Ramsay and the Kitchen Nightmares team were just doing their job of exposing the restaurant's issues. It's honestly not their fault if the truth hurts. Some owners even started throwing dirt on Chef Ramsay for staging the episodes. But wait, how could you stage this?
Look at that! Look!
I just don't get it. Why would you call a Michelin star chef over to help your failing business and get upset when he actually tries to offer some feedback? Another restaurant that was featured on the show back in 2011 sued Chef Ramsay and the producers of the show. This was 7 years later in 2018 when a clip from the show resurfaced on the show's Facebook page. The restaurant in question was Oceana Grill, a seafood spot located in the French Quarter of New Orleans. The clip showed Chef Ramsay throwing up after smelling some old shrimp that they had in the kitchen. The clip immediately went viral but has since been taken down from the face of the internet. Oceana Grill's parent company, Cajun Conti, wasn't happy about the clip's resurgence. They claimed that it was misleading since it was being shared as if it was a current event. But in fact, it was from a show that aired over 7 years ago. Cajun Conti was also alleging that the show's producers fabricated certain scenes and deliberately upped the drama to make Oceana look bad. They said that Chef Ramsay's vomiting and the discovery of dead mice in a rodent trap were all contrived and orchestrated to make for good TV. This wasn't the first time Oceana Grill took legal action against Kitchen Nightmares. Back in 2011, they actually tried to block the airing of the show altogether. I wonder what they were trying to hide. Cage and Conti claimed that they settled the first suit with the show's producers. Their condition was that they could only air the episode if they paid the restaurant $10,000 and included an update statement about Oceana's current conditions. Wait up, there's more. You wouldn't believe the audacity of these owners from Blackberries.
I walked in the front door, a mouse.
The mouse that you planted, I know.
Basically, what happened was, Chef Ramsay found a dead mouse at the front of the restaurant, and he was like, what the heck? Did these guys ever hire exterminators? So he picked the little guy up by the tail and went over to the staff all confused. But when he asked them about it, they were all like, oh yeah, we totally hired someone to deal with that. However, Ramsay wasn't buying it. Then the manager Shelly and her boyfriend started pointing fingers and accusing Chef Ramsay of planting the dead mouse himself. Could you believe that? The famous chef was so mad. How could they accuse him of something so ridiculous? Did his reputation depend on a dead mouse? Come on. But Ramsay, being Ramsay, decided to stay and help these stupid people anyway. The only time that he walked away in the history of the show was during the infamous Amy's Baking Company episode. I mean, could you even begin to grasp this craziness? A Michelin star chef who was invited to save your failing business jeopardized his reputation by trying to sabotage your restaurant? That's totally believable, right? One viewer perhaps had one of the most savage comebacks for these entitled restaurant owners. He said, dude must think Gordon put that dead mouse just for unnecessary drama for his TV show. Bruh, you're talking to Gordon Ramsay, not Kim Kardashian. God, these people are so self-absorbed. I allowed Chef Ramsay for dealing with such narcissistic freaks for a decade. He put the customers first and felt insulted at the way some restaurants treated them with their poor service. Speaking of which, do you remember the episode when a customer fell ill after eating lobster tail? The restaurant in question is Mama Maria's. The lobster was so bad that Chef Ramsay could smell it from a mile away, but the chef decided to cook it anyway. Isn't that insane? Thankfully, the customer was rushed to the hospital and made a full recovery.
The lobster, he said, tasted funny, and next thing I knew, he was sick.
But man, that was a close call. I can't even imagine what would have happened if the customer had eaten more of that rotten lobster. Chef Ramsay was horrified and couldn't believe what he saw. But the horrors didn't end there. This was the same restaurant that had enough frozen food for 12 months.
Oh my god, this goes on. Endless.
While Ramsay took on the challenge of turning struggling businesses into successful ones, it wasn't an easy task. He went above and beyond to help them, sometimes even acting like a therapist and bringing families together. While a small percentage of these businesses had the potential to succeed, the majority of them were simply lost causes. Most of the owners and chefs went back to their problematic ways, which tanked their business in the first place. I'm sure you remember Chappie. He has the reputation of being the angriest chef who's appeared on the show. Instead of just taking responsibility for the closure of his restaurant, he put all the blame on Chef Ramsay. In reality, as stated in a report from the Nashville Business Journal, Chappie's was closed by the state in June of 2013. And it was because of unpaid taxes. But horrible people like him made Chef Ramsay their scapegoat. So was he supposed to pay their taxes? It doesn't even make sense anymore. Chef Ramsay wasn't only at the receiving end of lawsuits and awful food, but also insults. This owner from El Greco had the audacity to yell at Ramsay and humiliate him.
Yeah, you f*** off. How's that? There we go.
Chef Mike was the hardest worker in the kitchen and was always available to quickly send out orders. Are you prepared to know who this mysterious chef is? You'll be stunned to learn that Chef Mike wasn't a person, but the microwave. Obviously, Chef Ramsay was furious. That's just lazy cooking, and the owner didn't have the spine to accept the truth.
Foul.
Yep, that's what happened at La Galleria 33. But the chef was totally cool about it, and this certainly didn't sit right with Chef Ramsay.
Look at me. You just dropped it on the floor. Yeah. You can't cook it.
Facing one nightmare after another, Ramsay eventually had a tipping point. Chef Ramsay revealed what ultimately made him stop. Speaking to Entertainment Weekly, he said, "I woke up in the middle of the south of France after filming a week with a British guy I wouldn't trust to run my bath, let alone my restaurant," he told the magazine. Because he was running a ski resort, he felt like he could take advantage of all those customers because there was nowhere else to eat. He was giving me shit for telling him the truth, and I thought, I'm done. But as it turns out, Fox wasn't quite ready to let go of the show. When asked if Kitchen Nightmares would ever come back, he said,
It may come back, depends on my ulcers.
good for him. Chef Ramsay decided to put his health first, as he should. But then he received a call from Fox about his decision. They wanted to talk about it together as partners before pulling the plug on the show. Instead of canceling it altogether, they came up with a compromise. They decided to put it on hold for a few years and bring it back in a different form. But I'm glad Chef Ramsay took some time off to get his health back on track and give his stomach some much needed rest. And that's how they came up with a new show called 24 Hours to Hell and Back. This show is all about saving restaurants in one day, and thank God for that. Very recently, we've seen Chef Ramsay on ITV Next Level Chef, which is being hailed as the toughest cooking contest on TV ever. When it comes to Chef Ramsay, he's a tough taskmaster even when it comes to himself. And just when you thought it couldn't get any crazier, watch this next twist unfold. To start things off, let's head over to Bass 46 in Woodland Park, New Jersey, which is the brainchild of Steve and Sandy. So these two had been hustling in the bar game for a while, and also ran a couple of other joints. After stacking up some green over the course of a decade or so, they decided it was high time to do their own thing. And that's how Bass 46 was born.
We've been together
25 years, 1998.
But soon enough, their coffers went dry, an all too common thing in the restaurant biz. And what was their biggest problem? This guy right here, Chef Bobby. Trust me, he's a handful.
The steak, the french fries, the pizza was too soggy.
Bobby isn't exactly what you'd call an easygoing cooperative guy. You know, the ideal person you'd want in a restaurant environment? Well, this guy was the complete opposite. And when I tell you he was way in over his head, I'm not kidding.
Kitchen, don't even talk.
According to Steve, Bobby even hired more cooks to avoid working himself. Things got so bad with him taking charge that Steve claimed that Chef Bobby was a living kitchen nightmare. Coming from an owner who's handled several business ventures, that's saying something. There was no doubt, by this point, Bobby was an aggressive guy.
The bell ding 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 all night long.
If that sounded threatening to you, you ain't seen nothing yet, guys.
Every steak was messed up yesterday.
I don't know if you realize I'm the one with the knife.
Yeah, he whipped out his knife as if it was some kind of threat. Dude, watch it. Don't forget that you're being filmed here. If I was Steve, I would have shown that guy the door right on the spot. His aggressive and totally out of line attitude needed to be stopped as soon as possible. And who better than Chef Ramsay to do the deed? But when the famous chef first arrived, he was in shock. First things first, it was time for a taste test. When Ramsay tried a bunch of stuff from the menu, he wasn't impressed at all. But what really got him were those tacos. The portion size was so large, it had to have been made for an entire table. And so Chef Ramsay sent it right back to the kitchen and asked them to correct the portion size. But what did Bobby whip up instead? He sent this from totally out of left field.
He's probably got a small package, and that upsets him, so he wants to take it out into my tacos.
This guy wasn't just dishing out gigantic tacos, he was serving them with a heaping helping of attitude to boot. The audacity to pull a stunt like this in front of the Gordon Ramsay of all people takes guts, but it's also plain stupid. But this catty behavior wasn't as sudden as I'm making it out to be here. It was evident from the start that Bobby was pretty unhappy that Chef Ramsay was there.
If he doesn't love my food, he can kiss my ass.
Even while preparing the food, he cursed Ramsay out like he was his mortal enemy or something.
I hope he chokes on his taco.
And this is how he was acting before Chef Ramsay had even critiqued him yet. So when those 3 bite wonders finally hit the table, Chef Ramsay didn't waste a second. He sent them right back from where they came from. Oh, those things were ugly as hell. Now, I'm not sure what Bobby was expecting, but he clearly can't handle any criticism whatsoever. When Chef Ramsay sent those tacos back, Bobby had a whole lot to say about it.
He's sending back and giving these messages. Well, here's my message. Take it and shove it up your ass.
Bobby, thinking he was a real savage, handed out his business card with his name Bobby Fortunando printed in bold smack in the middle of it. But let's just be honest, Chef Ramsay's pretty much the boss in every room that he walks into. You see, he shot back, pointing out an obvious spelling mistake. And you won't believe what he suggested instead.
Bobby Unfortunato.
Wait, what? Bobby Unfortunando? And when this bright suggestion was relayed back to the kitchen, Bobby decided to get all tough.
Gordon needs to understand. If he gets in my face, there could be a problem.
Oh man, this dude had a massive ego and lived in this fantasy world where his food could never be bad. So naturally, he acted all snobby when someone dared to complain.
Don't shy away from responsibility. It's a chef's dream.
But it isn't my restaurant. I do what he asks for.
This tough act didn't last really long, cause when Chef Ramsay confronted him and the entire crew, he didn't have a lot to say. I'm gonna be honest here, I really expected a major showdown. The famous chef was dealing with a gangster, that is, a culinary gangster?
I'm the culinary gangster.
Well, anyway, when Chef Ramsay asked about the cheese sauce, Bobby had the audacity to say it was partially homemade, like that would fly. As it turns out, he'd been mixing in Cheese Whiz the whole time and trying to pass it off as his own thing. Come on, Bobby, at least try to live up to the title that you gave yourself. Anyway, Bobby was a walking pile of empty promises, and Steve's patience was wearing thin. When the big boss received another complaint, it was the final straw for him.
This restaurant's called Bask 46. And the only thing we're basking is in a restaurant full of
Oh god, it was time for Chef Ramsay to do the kitchen's hygiene check, and what he stumbled upon was an absolute horror show. The fridge was a mess with stuff all over the place. Horrifyingly, there was a lone frozen chicken taking a swim in a tub of batter. And the marinated meat left out in the open for God knows how long. The place was a breeding ground for rotten chicken, fruits, and veggies. They discovered the drain their money was pouring down. It's wild how the owner, and more so Bobby, never noticed this before. When Chef Ramsay called him over, he refused to take accountability.
I don't have the staff to do all this work.
Come on, Bobby.
Now, why doesn't that surprise me? Anyway, Chef Ramsay shut that whole kitchen down. It was high time for him to serve up a hefty reality check and knock some sense into every person working there. But guess what? Suddenly, everyone was on board to turn things around. However, before Chef Ramsay gave the restaurant a fresh start, he wanted to have a one-on-one chat with Bobby, and we all know why, right?
You're the one who has to do the rethinking. You come back, new man. You're taking the out of him and you're not giving your all.
Trust me, Bobby was a real pain for everyone. But he decided to come back stronger and smarter and promised to not repeat those dumb mistakes. What's more, he even had a heart-to-heart with Steve. Well, that's definitely an improvement. But here's the kicker, Bobby never acted on those promises. Instead, he just quit. Nevertheless, at least Bass 46 has unburdened itself from the sorriest chef I've seen in recent memory. But if you thought Bobby was living in his own world, then wait until you hear about the next owner on my list. This guy took delusion to a whole other level. I'm talking about Jorge, the owner of In the Drink. Look, if you ask me, I think the restaurant had the perfect location right in the middle of a freaking golf course in Wayne, New Jersey. Ideally, business should have been bustling, but the dining room indicated otherwise.
I'm in a hole. A hole.
Gee, man, Chef Ramsay couldn't even figure out if he'd walk in from the front or the back. It was like a freaking funeral home, dull and lifeless. And let's talk about the food, shall we? It definitely needed some serious work.
The burger was overcooked, it was supposed to be medium rare, and the bun was burnt.
Overall, that restaurant was in deep trouble, no doubt about it. But the owner, he'd beg to differ.
You haven't even got a manager inside this business.
No, we can't afford one.
Jorge was living in La La Land, thinking everything was just fine. But in reality, from the awful food to the place feeling like a ghost town, it was a mess. And to top it all off, they didn't even have a manager. But this guy was convinced that the place couldn't be doing any better. Unreal, right? Meanwhile, the staff were seriously busting their butts and basically left to fend for themselves most of the time. Especially Carlos, the head chef, and Nadia, the server who put on the manager hat on occasion. So it shouldn't come to much of a surprise that the restaurant was tanking financially, but you won't believe how bad it was. It was in the red for a whopping $250,000.
If I had to calculate all of the risk, $250,000.
What's even worse is that Jorge was keeping all of this a secret from his wife the entire time.
Oh my god. Why you never say anything to me?
Oh yeah, he knew that the restaurant was in deep trouble, but denial had him in a chokehold. So during the dinner service, Chef Ramsay decided to snoop around in the kitchen himself, and man, it was a total disaster. There was this one table that sent their food back not once, but twice. But here's the real question, who's at fault for the food not living up to the standards? Is it the chef's fault or the owner, who can see the obvious issues? I mean, he's the one responsible for quality control, right? But you know what, it wasn't just the food that was bugging Chef Ramsay.
You okay? I don't feel good, but I need to continue.
Poor Carlos was seriously overworked and it was wrecking his health. Luckily, the famous chef stepped in and took care of him. And guess who's to blame again? Yep, it's our dear buddy Jorge.
Apron on, jump behind the line.
Ramsey gave the man a piece of his mind and asked him to take over Carlos's job. But did he do a good job? Not really. The dude was drowning in orders and time was ticking away while he moved at a snail's pace. Tough break, man. Jorge even got mixed up with the orders, saying one of them had already left.
I just ordered that. It hasn't gone. Stop there with me like that.
The famous chef was totally justified in being annoyed. And then, bam, an argument erupted between Chef Ramsay and Jorge. Immediately, I was thinking anything could happen at any moment.
Well, listen, what do you mean when nobody's listening?
Try and cook the whole table.
I mean, seriously, why couldn't Jorge just listen to reason? He even talked back to our main man as if it was totally okay.
I told you like 5 times, chef.
No, you didn't tell me 5 times.
Along with being on another level of delusion, disrespecting someone who knew better than him was one of his hobbies. And what was Jorge's excuse for the chaos? Apparently, everything was moving too fast. I mean, that's how restaurants work, man. But what about Carlos working himself sick? Jorge took over for like 5 minutes and things were already falling apart. Well, what happened next was pretty much what you'd expect. Chef Ramsay checked out all the dishes and each one of them had something wrong with it. Okay, time to close shop, folks. After the restaurant shut down, Chef Ramsay straight up called Jorge out on all the issues, from those crazy long ticket times to golfers not even finding the front door. The famous chef made it all crystal clear, but what was Jorge's response?
I tried to do my best. Carlos is the one in charge.
Carlos is on his knees.
Like, man, how hard is it to take some accountability, huh? Someone had to be upfront with him, and who better than Chef Ramsay? He then called Jorge deluded, hoping he'd realize how wrong he's been.
How do I know you're deluded? Because you're dreaming.
Man, they were literally inches away from each other. But Jorge wasn't done though.
All you do is screaming, I need my check. Repeat, can you recall the check?
After the long war, things finally simmered down between the two. And Chef Ramsay made one thing clear. He can't help Jorge if he's not willing to help himself. The famous chef then made it clear he had no interest in butting heads with Jorge, and if they needed his help, they should let him know now. And the answer should be obvious. There was no way the restaurant could rise back up without his help. The restaurant got a much-needed makeover, and Jorge finally decided to do his job right. And today, it seems like the restaurant is thriving better than ever. But what you're about to see next is a cold war between two siblings. You see, this diner in Queens, Astoria, has been around since 1965. Bel Air is owned by this Greek-American duo, Archie and Patty Delaportis, and apparently, Archie came all the way from Greece when he was just 17. And let me tell you, life was no cakewalk for him in the beginning. But his struggles didn't hold him back one bit. Before you know it, he and Patty had their own spots and they had successfully run the show for years. It was only natural for the couple to pass on the baton and let their two sons handle the game as they decided to take a step back and enjoy their retirement. So allow me to introduce you to Cal and Peter, a pair of brothers who seem to be running the show. But somewhere down the line, there sparked a friction brewing between these siblings.
What's going on? I can't do my job if you're not supervising the waiter. You're in the kitchen. I'm not in the kitchen.
Yeah, things definitely didn't look too well between them. And Cal had some pretty interesting things to say about his brother.
My brother and I are supposed to be doing the same amount of work. My brother doesn't want to work.
Call it what you want, but one thing's for certain, dude was frustrated as hell. I mean, think about it. He was basically a one-man show running a crew of 20. And trust me, handling all the responsibilities solo has got to be exhausting. Eventually, the pressure got the best of him, and what Cal said next was completely unexpected.
Go hang out with mommy, don't bother me.
A comment like that is bound to set off even the calmest person. Meanwhile, Peter had his own issues dealing with the business and troubled relationships within the family.
When me and my brother don't get along, it is very difficult for the diner to function.
But Chef Ramsay was on a wild mission to end this diner drama and bring back the buzz. He was ready to work his magic in the middle of all this chaos, but once he arrived, things didn't look too promising for him, especially the food.
That's about as Greek as Donald Trump.
Chef Ramsay sure knows how to spit a burner. Now, if you thought the food was bad, wait till you see the kitchen.
Oh, no. Oh.
Ugh, that was hard to watch, but nothing can even come close to what the freezer looked like.
Smell in here. Oh my god.
Man, imagine you stroll in here, tra-la-la-la-la, all hyped up for your absolute favorite meal, and then you see that. I mean, it's not just bad, it's downright revolting. The height of gastronomic horrors happening behind the scenes was multifold, and this brings us to an important question. Who's to blame for all this mess? Let's hear it from the owner himself, shall we?
A restaurant needs two parts. It needs front of house and back of house. My brother and I are supposed to be doing the same amount of work.
Yeah, Peter wasn't exactly a superstar when it came to lending a hand, that's for sure. Meanwhile, struggling to drive the business without an extra set of hands, Cal didn't hesitate to point the finger at Peter the very first opportunity that he got. Oh man, these brothers were ready to go at each other's throats. Had it not been for the involvement of the parents, the diner would have been a dead restaurant walking. You see, when it came to serving the food, it often ended up right back in the kitchen due to the numerous complaints. Some dishes were undone, some were overdone, I think you get it. Clearly there was a major lapse in the management, but Peter had a different take on the whole situation.
I blame my brother, ultimately because it's going out.
Yeah, the blame game was going strong. When Chef Ramsay inquired about the situation, he wasn't prepared for what Cal was about to reveal.
He's at his fiance's place.
So he's paid by here, but he's working his girlfriend's restaurant.
So, let me get this straight. Peter was essentially just coasting along, not pulling his weight, but definitely living off the money? Instead of pitching in and supporting his brother at their own family diner, he was off the clock for several hours at his fiance's place. When it comes to family loyalty and responsibility, dude was on a completely different wavelength. Oh, you can bet that their conflict wasn't just a minor hiccup, it had been simmering and brewing for quite some time.
There was a while we didn't speak for 6 months. We just started speaking like maybe a month or two ago.
So we've now gotten a glimpse of Cal's perspective, but what about Peter's side of the story? As the saying goes, there's always two sides to every coin, so Chef Ramsay asked the million-dollar question, and Peter's response was not what anyone expected.
I don't feel like I'm respected as a brother.
It appears that Peter might have been grappling with feelings of being underappreciated and not receiving enough love or acknowledgement. So his lack of motivation to put in the effort at the diner might have been a natural response to these emotions. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that he didn't carry some remorse for not being present and supportive in the past. I'd say that realization hit way sooner than Chef Ramsay expected for Peter.
And I need to make a change for my business.
With a rapid diner makeover in the books, it was finally time for the duo to bury the hatchet and get the diner back on track. After all, it was their ongoing conflict that played a significant role in the diner's downfall. And to do this, Chef Ramsay had to knock some sense into the brother for them to take a step towards peace.
And you need to set your differences aside. That's first.
Surprisingly, what appeared to be an unending war might not have been as impossible to resolve as it seemed, and it's all thanks to the one and only Chef Ramsay.
It's a very nice experience. Everyone said it was fantastic.
From here on out, it's nothing but improvement for both the diner and brother's relationship. Ready for the next shocker? You won't believe what comes up next. I'm talking about the situation at Bel Air Diner, before Chef Ramsay worked his magic and turned it around, of course. This diner, smack in the heart of New York's Queensboro, was originally in the hands of a married couple and had been serving since 1965. However, it's a fact of life that people get old, and that's why their sons Cal and Peter took over the reins. But don't expect the usual tight-knit sibling bond here. Those two brothers weren't exactly the best of buddies.
There's food behind because they're not grabbing the right
when they
thing.
come out. You got the ticket?
I think if I wasn't here, the diner would already be closed.
It seems like one of those siblings was all for keeping the family business going, but the other? Yeah, he couldn't care less. But hey, let's first talk about how the diner came into existence in the first place. Archie, Cal's dad, immigrated from Greece to the USA when he was just 17 years old. He worked hard for that diner, day in and day out, starting off his career as a humble dishwasher. Things were really tough for Archie, but he refused to give up. But unlike Archie, Peter wasn't as motivated.
He's not here.
No.
But he's supposed to be running the place.
In tandem with me.
So he doesn't commit to the business at all.
At all.
Yikes, Cal seemed to be the only one doing his job here, while Peter, on the other hand, was busy at his fiance's restaurant. Like, restaurants are a big responsibility. Splitting your time between two is never gonna work. But what he revealed next was the final straw for Chef Ramsay.
50 grand a year allowance.
An allowance? What is he, 12? That's totally messed up. No wonder the diner wasn't doing well.
Oh my God.
It looked like the kitchen hadn't been in the same room as a sponge in years. Chef Ramsay didn't hold back one bit when he described it, and honestly, I think comparing it to Saw was totally justified.
It's like a scene out of Saw.
I mean, I probably would have hurled being on the same block as this place. But the basement was the real shocker. It was so disgustingly dirty, I wouldn't be surprised if the entire place was covered with mold. And this makes me wonder, if the basement was that nasty, the ingredients had to have been just as awful, right? Well, after that disappointing lunch service, Chef Ramsay was curious to know where they stored their produce. And let me tell you now, the entrance to that basement couldn't have been creepier.
It's down there.
Yeah, stepping into the basement took some serious courage. There were a treasure trove of horrifying secrets for Chef Ramsay to uncover there. It wasn't just about the surface level griminess, the issue went way deeper than that. I mean, that oven was practically swimming in liquid grease, and it was in dire need of a major scrub down. And their storage room? Ugh, that room had water all over the place, and it seemed like nobody had bothered to mop it up for a decade. But here's the kicker, that basement was massive. It was so damn big that Chef Ramsay thought he was in some kind of maze.
If I get lost down here, somebody send help.
I'm not joking here. Chef Ramsay actually got lost in the ingredients section. I can only imagine how stomach-churning that experience must have been for him. This whole situation was beyond gross.
Nothing labeled, everything is uncovered, no dates.
That's just nasty. And don't even get me started on the fridge. It was practically a breeding ground for a whole bunch of germs, not to mention the stuff that was in there. Now, look, before you think you've seen the worst, let me remind you that we're only a couple minutes into the video here. We're not even close to being done. If you think I'm exaggerating, then wait till you see what Chef Ramsay uncovered next.
What the is that?
It's really no surprise that the famous chef was grossed out. I mean, this was just a health hazard waiting to happen, and if you think that the show was making a big deal about it for the drama, just wait till you hear about first-hand experience from one of the viewers. This viewer right here spilled the beans on just how filthy that basement truly was. Seriously though, you don't need a detective to figure out why Chef Ramsay was so grossed out. And let's not forget that the show has come under fire several times for amping up the drama for better ratings. But what this viewer has to say is proof that, at least this time around, it's as real as it gets. It's not every day that viewers get to see the raw, unvarnished truth behind the scenes, right? But when this viewer happened to walk through the kitchen, although he doesn't specify who exactly, he says that he found the owner smoking a cigarette. I don't know what's clearer than that, but this is evidence that they didn't give a shit about cleanliness at all. I wonder how he got access to the basement. Either way, it looks like it was no different than the state that Chef Ramsay found it in. The viewer continued, pointing out that old clamshells were hanging from buckets out in the open. He also happened to spot the cooling tower, which was also smeared with a murky brown layer of gonk. No wonder he wanted everybody to steer clear of this place. And it turns out, it wasn't just the basement. If you pay attention during the episode, it's pretty clear the whole place wasn't much better.
Oh, hell.
But I need you to understand that that wasn't the end of it. Apparently, it even extended to the restrooms. And although we didn't get to see them on the show, another customer made a sacrifice for us to get the scoop on the situation. He described the scene as absolutely vile. And apparently, this person is a regular customer, because he ran into a nasty toilet on 2 separate occasions. If you thought that was revolting, the women's restroom wasn't any better. This one woman came across a nightmarish scene when she found shit, like literal shit, smeared all over the toilet paper roll. And this loser who did it actually put that mess back onto the dispenser. Like, I don't even know what to say, that's so disgusting. Imagine you're at this place for a pleasant evening, hoping for some pleasant food, though that's a whole other can of worms, and this is what you get? I'd lose my appetite in an instant and get out of that place right then and there. No looking back. But hold on, the story doesn't end there. This dude here knows what's up in the diner. This viewer, going by the name Supermarket Popular 17, claimed that he lived just across the street from the restaurant. While he wasn't a big fan of the diner and only visited the place to pick up some eggs and bacon, every single time that he walked in, he was welcomed by a terrifying sight. Remember the lobster tank?
Lobster in a diner. There we are.
Yeah, the same tank Chef Ramsay picked the lobster for his lunch from. So this viewer found lobsters eating each other, and sometimes even found multiple lobsters laying dead in the tank. Ugh. Like, there's a reason why restaurants keep lobsters alive before cooking them. When they die, they let off some real nasty stuff. Now, do you guys remember the infamous lobster tank that sent a customer to the hospital?
A dead lobster. Everything else in there, they've been feeding off that lobster. Then they become full of bacteria.
Which makes me wonder, what's the point of having a lobster tank when you can't even maintain it? Well, obviously the customer was disgusted. However, despite complaining about the ghastly state of it on every visit, the staff would just remove the carcass and continue on with their daily routine like it was nothing. That's it. No wonder this place was being run into the ground. And now that we've seen the stuff that the cameras never had the pleasure of capturing, let's dive back into the other atrocities that Chef Ramsay was about to uncover. First up, let's take a peek into the meat fridge, and fair warning, what he stumbled upon next could possibly be the nastiest thing you've ever seen.
Oh my God. I don't think anyone's got any idea what is going on here.
Yup, what you're looking at is a whole month's worth of meat sitting in rotting liquid, waiting